A night of torrential rain, headlights cutting through the darkness. An old car, but well-maintained, so as not to give off a signal. Inside, Carlos, 38, a single father, glances in the rearview mirror at his 8-year-old daughter, Sophia, sleeping in the back seat. He's exhausted after another double shift at the bakery, dark circles under his eyes, but the care he takes in adjusting the blanket over his daughter shows all the love he feels. The rain is relentless, and the windshield barely manages to clear the endless stream of water. Suddenly, he sees a figure in the middle of the sidewalk, a young woman in a dirty, torn wedding dress, barefoot, holding a broken heel. She tries unsuccessfully to hail a taxi, but everyone passes her by as if she doesn't exist. Her hair is plastered to her face, her makeup smeared with tears and water. There's something in her gaze that makes Carlos hesitate. He looks at his daughter, then at the young woman, and takes a deep breath before rolling down the window. "Need help?" The young woman looks up, startled, as if she hadn't expected anyone to stop. Her eyes are red, her hands trembling. She looks back, as if afraid of something or someone. Carlos doesn't understand, but the instinct to protect, the same one that drives him to work tirelessly for his daughter, speaks louder. "Come in. It's not safe to stay there." She hesitates, but the rain and fear make her accept. As she gets into the car, the smell of expensive perfume mingles with that of wet earth. Carlos notices her well-manicured nails, her designer dress, the way she looks as if she doesn't belong in that poor neighborhood. He doesn't ask questions, just accelerates, trying to ignore the tension now filling the car. "Marriage," he ventures, trying to break the silence. The young woman looks down at the dress, touches the wet fabric, and a heavy silence falls. When she finally speaks, her voice is a panicked whisper. "It was meant to be, but I couldn't do it." Carlos glances at her quickly, but then returns his attention to the road. It's then that he notices, in the rearview mirror, a black car parked a few meters away, headlights on, as if watching. The young woman notices his gaze and turns sharply, panic written all over her face. "Please, don't stop at the next light. Don't look back." He doesn't understand, but he speeds up. The rain pounds the car, and the young woman clenches her hands, her nails digging into her palms. Carlos senses something is very wrong, but before he can ask, she murmurs, almost to herself, "He wouldn't let me go. Never." Carlos doesn't have time to react. The roar of a powerful engine approaches, and the young woman shrinks back into the seat, as if expecting the worst. He glances in the mirror again, and sees the black car speeding toward him. There's no time for questions. There's no time for anything. The young woman turns to him, her eyes filled with tears and despair. "You don't know what you're getting into. He'll destroy you just for helping me." Carlos doesn't respond. He just grips the steering wheel, his mind racing to understand what's happening. But it's too late. The black car collides with them, throwing Carlos's world into chaos. The glass shatters, the metal creaks, and the last sound he hears before everything goes black is his daughter's scream, frightened in the back seat. And then, everything goes silent. The throbbing pain in his forehead was the first thing Carlos felt when he regained consciousness. The smell of gasoline and rain filled the car, mixed with the muffled sound of Sophia crying in the back seat. He blinked, trying to orient himself, and saw the cracked windshield, the rain still falling relentlessly. The young bride was leaning against the dashboard, breathing heavily, her dress now stained with mud and blood. The car had been pushed onto the curb, the bodywork dented on the driver's side. Carlos tried to move, but a sharp stab in his shoulder made him groan. He looked back and saw Sophia, pale, her eyes wide, her hands trembling, clutching the seatbelt. "Daddy!" The girl's voice broke between sobs. "What was that?" He didn't have time to respond. The young bride turned suddenly, her face white as a sheet, her fingers digging into Carlos's arm. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice cracking. "We need to get out of here. Now." Carlos didn't understand, but his instinct to protect his daughter made him react. With effort, he unbuckled his seatbelt and tried to open the door, which was dented. A sharp kick to the rear window froze them. Two men in dark suits, their faces impassive, approached the car. One of them grabbed the door handle, trying to open it. The young bride held Carlos's arm with desperate strength. "Don't let them take me," she begged, her eyes filling with tears. Please. Carlos looked at the men, then at Sophia, and knew he had no choice. With a sudden movement, he pushed the young woman aside and opened the driver's door with his shoulder, ignoring the pain. The rain hit them hard, and he pulled Sophia out, placing her behind him. The young woman staggered out, her dress heavy with water, her hair plastered to her face. The men advanced, unhurriedly, as if they knew there was nowhere to run. Run! Carlos shouted at the young woman, pushing her toward a dark alley between two buildings. Take my daughter. The young woman hesitated, but Carlos's look was enough. She grabbed Sophia's hand and ran, her broken heels hampering her steps. Carlos stayed behind, facing the men, his hands in fists, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it was about to burst from his chest. It wasn't a fair fight, he knew, but he wouldn't let them take Sophia. He wouldn't let them take anyone. The first man smiled, as if amused by the situation. He was taller, stronger, with scars on his hands that spoke of violence. It doesn't have to be this way, friend, he said, his voice calm, almost friendly. We just want a girl. Hand her over and no one gets hurt. Carlos didn't respond. He just threw himself forward, punching the man in the face. The impact hurt, iron knots off his fingers, but the man barely flinched. A swift blow to Carlos's stomach doubled him over, knocking the wind out of him. He fell to his knees in the puddle, the rain pelting his face, pain exploding through his body. The second man approached, grabbing him by the hair and throwing him against the wall. You don't know who you're messing with, the man spat, his breath smelling of cigarettes and beer. She's not worth it. Carlos tried to get up, but another punch, this time to the jaw, knocked him down again. He watched, in slow motion, as the men turned and started running toward the alley. Panic gripped him. Sophia. They were going to get Sophia. With superhuman effort, he got up and ran after them, ignoring the pain, the dizziness, the blood trickling from his lip. The alley was narrow, dimly lit, and filled with trash and stacked boxes. He heard footsteps ahead, Sophia's muffled cries, the young bride screams for him not to look back. Carlos sped forward, his lungs burning, his legs trembling. As he turned the corner, he saw one of the men grabbing the young woman's arm, pulling her hard. Sophia was crouched on the ground, crying, her hands covering her ears. Let her go, Carlos roared, throwing himself at the man. This time, surprise was on his side. The man stumbled, releasing the young woman, and Carlos took advantage to push him against the wall. The other man turned, pulling something metal from his pocket. Carlos didn't have time to see what it was. A flash, a sharp noise, and a sharp pain seared his arm. He screamed, recoiling, and saw the barrel of a gun pointed at his face. Enough, the man said, his voice cold. You lost. The young bride threw herself in front of Carlos, her arms open, as if she could protect him. Please, she pleaded, leave him alone. I'm going with you. The man with the gun laughed, a mirthless sound. It's about time for that, princess. The boss doesn't like to wait. Carlos felt his body heavy, his vision blurry. He looked at Sophia, huddled on the ground, and knew he couldn't give up. Not now. With a swift movement, he kicked a trash can toward the man, distracting them for a second. It was enough. He grabbed Sophia by the arm and pulled her back, running in the opposite direction, dragging the girl with him. The young bride fell behind, the men surrounding her, but her eyes met Carlos's for an instant, and he saw something in them that chilled him. It wasn't fear. It was resignation. Run, Carlos, she shouted. Take her away from here. He didn't look back. He just ran, Sophia in his arms, the rain washing the blood from his face, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it was about to burst. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to get Sophia out of there. He had to protect her, at any cost. The lights of the main street appeared ahead, cars passing, people coming and going, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the shadows. Carlos entered a convenience store, panting, his daughter trembling in his arms. The clerk looked at them, startled, but Carlos didn't have time to explain. He hid behind a shelf, trying to catch his breath, his mind racing. Daddy, what's going on? Sophia asked, her eyes filling with tears. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to explain that, in a matter of minutes, his life had been turned upside down, that they were now being hunted by men who knew no mercy. that the young bride, whoever she was, had sacrificed herself for them. Outside, the sound of a car pulling away could be heard. Carlos peeked out the window and saw the black car speeding past, its tires screeching in the rain. He didn't see the young woman. He didn't know if she was inside, if she was alive, if she was okay. He only knew that, for now, they were safe. But for how long? The convenience store was small, dimly lit. The smell of burnt coffee and fried snacks mixed with the damp air from the rain that still dripped from Carlos and Sophia's clothes. He set her down, kneeling in front of her check for injuries. The girl's eyes were red, her face wet with tears and rain, but she didn't complain about the pain. She just looked at her father with a mixture of fear and trust, as if she knew that no matter what happened, he wouldn't leave her alone. "Are you okay, honey?" Carlos asked, running his hands over her arms, checking for injuries. Sophia nodded, but her chin was trembling. "I'm scared, Daddy." "Me too," he admitted quietly. "But we'll be fine. I promise." It was a promise he wasn't sure he could keep, but he needed to say it. He needed Sophia to believe him, even if just for a few minutes. Outside, the street continued its normal rhythm, as if nothing had happened. Cars passed, people walked under umbrellas, laughed, and talked on the phone. No one imagined that, inside, a man and his daughter were hiding, being hunted by something they didn't even understand. Carlos looked at the attendant, a young man with disheveled hair and bags under his eyes, who watched them with a mixture of curiosity and fear. "Did you see those men?" Carlos asked, his voice hoarse. The attendant shook his head nervously. "I just saw a black car speeding past. I didn't stop to look." Carlos closed his eyes for a second, trying to think. He needed a plan. He needed help. But who could help them? The police? He didn't even know what to say. That he was being chased by armed men because of a girl he'd given him a ride? It sounded crazy. What if those men had connections? What if the police couldn't, or wouldn't, do anything? He opened his eyes and saw Sophia looking at him hopefully. He couldn't give up. Not now. "We need to get out of here," Carlos decided, standing up. "Let's go to Grandma's house. We'll be safe there." Sophia didn't question him. She just took his hand, squeezing it tightly. They left through the back door, entering a narrow alley that led to another street. The rain had eased, but the air was still heavy and oppressive. Carlos looked both ways, searching for any sign of danger. Nothing. Just the distant roar of cars and the sound of his own footsteps. They walked quickly, keeping to the shadows, avoiding the main streets. Carlos didn't know if they were being followed, but he wasn't going to risk it. At every corner, he looked back, his heart pounding. Sophia didn't speak, just followed, her eyes wide, her breathing rapid. After 20 minutes, they arrived at the small two-story house where Carlos's mother lived. The house was dark, with only a dim light coming from the living room. He knocked on the door, his body tense, ready for anything. He heard slow footsteps on the other side, and then the door opened, revealing his mother, Maria, a woman with gray hair and a weather-beaten face, but with a gaze that still conveyed strength. "My God, what happened to you guys?" she exclaimed, pulling them inside and hurriedly closing the door. Carlos didn't have time to respond. As soon as they entered, Sophia threw herself into her grandmother's arms, crying. Maria hugged her tightly, looking at her son with concern. "Carlos, you're bleeding. What's going on?" He ran his hand over his face, feeling the dried blood on his lip, the throbbing pain in his arm. He didn't know where to begin. How could he explain that, in one night, his life had turned into a nightmare? "I don't know, Mom," he admitted, his voice breaking. I just gave a girl a ride, and now we're being followed." Maria looked at him in disbelief. "Persecuted? By whom?" "I don't know. Armed men. They wanted her. And now I think they want us too." Maria hugged Sophia close, as if to shield her from the world. Carlos felt the weight of the situation fall upon him. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about Sophia, about his mother, about people he loved who were now in danger because of a seemingly simple decision. "We need to get out of here," Carlos said, his mind racing. "We can't stay. If they find out." "Where are we going?" Maria asked, her voice shaky but firm. "The police." Carlos shook his head. "I don't know if it's possible. I don't know who to trust." Just then, Carlos's phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out, staring at the screen. An unknown number. His heart sank. Only one person, or rather, only one group of people, could be calling him right now. No answer, Maria said, as if reading his thoughts. But Carlos knew he couldn't ignore it. If it was about the young woman, if it was a threat, he needed to know. With a trembling hand, he answered, "Hello." Silence on the other end. Then, a calm, almost friendly male voice. "Carlos, isn't it? The Good Samaritan." He felt his stomach churn. "Who are you?" "I think you already know," the voice replied. "And I think you know there's no point in running." Carlos looked at Sophia, at Maria. They were looking at him, hope and fear in their eyes. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice firm despite his fear. "I only want what's mine," the voice said. "The girl. You hit her. That was a mistake. I don't know where she is." Carlos lied, his mind racing. "I just gave her a ride. Then she disappeared." "Don't lie to me, Carlos." The voice continued, still calm, but with a tone that chilled his veins. "You don't want your daughter to pay for your mistake, do you?" He felt like he had been punched in the chest. "Leave my daughter out of this." "Then give me what I want," the voice said, "or I'll get it myself." The call was cut off. Carlos stood there, the phone still pressed to his ear, his body trembling. Maria approached, her eyes brimming with tears. "What is it?" she asked, her voice a whisper. Carlos couldn't answer. He just looked at Sophia, who was watching him, confused and scared. He knew what he had to do, but he didn't know if he had the strength. "We need to go," he said finally. Now. Carlos's mother's house was no longer a refuge. The walls, once familiar and cozy, now seemed too fragile to protect them. Maria clutched Sophia to her chest, while Carlos, phone still in hand, stared out the living room window, as if expecting to see shadows moving outside. The rain had stopped, but the air remained heavy, charged with a suffocating tension. "We can't stay here," Carlos repeated, his voice low but firm. "They know who I am. They know where we live. It won't be long before they find out where you are." Maria shook her head, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Where do we go, then? We have no money. We have no one." Carlos closed his eyes for a second, trying to think. He couldn't call the police. Not after that call. Not after hearing that man's voice, so calm, so certain there was no escape. He looked at Sophia, who watched him silently, her eyes wide and frightened. He couldn't let anything happen to her. Not after everything they'd already been through. "We're going to the bus station," he decided suddenly. "Take the first bus out of town. Anywhere. It just has to be far from here." Maria opened her mouth to protest, but saw the determination on her son's face and simply nodded. There was no time for arguments. Carlos grabbed Sophia's backpack and threw some clothes inside, along with the little money he had in his pocket. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. "Let's go," he said, extending his hand to Sophia. "And we won't look back." They left through the back door, keeping to the shadows, as if the night itself could hide their footsteps. The streets were empty, the silence broken only by the distant sound of a passing car. Carlos held Sophia's hand, quickening his pace, while Maria, despite her age, kept pace with them with a determination only mothers possess. The bus station was a few blocks away, an old, dimly lit building filled with people who, like them, seemed to be fleeing something. Carlos entered, looking around for any sign of danger. Nothing. Just weary travelers, families waiting for buses, street vendors offering coffee and sandwiches. He approached the counter, trying to remain calm. "3 tickets for the next bus," he asked, his voice firm despite his racing heart. The attendant looked at them, then at her watch. "There's only one leaving in 20 minutes. To the capital. It's the last one of the night." Carlos didn't hesitate. 3 passages. He paid with the little money he had, keeping the tickets in his pocket like a talisman. Maria sat on a bench, pulling Sophia close, while Carlos stood with his back to the wall, watching every person who entered or left. Every unfamiliar face was a threat. Every footstep, a warning. "Daddy," Sophia called softly, tugging at his shirt. "Are we going to be okay?" He knelt in front of her, cupping her face in his hands. "We will," he promised, even though he didn't know if he could keep it. "I won't let anything happen to you. Ever." Sophia nodded, but her eyes were still filled with fear. Carlos stood, looking at Maria, who gave him a sad smile. She didn't need to say anything. He knew what she was thinking, that they were running from something they didn't understand. that perhaps there was no escape. Suddenly, the sound of a powerful engine caught his attention. He looked out the window and saw a black car parked outside the bus station. He couldn't see who was inside, but something in his instinct screamed danger. He turned, looking for an exit, but the only door was the main one, and it was right in front of the car. "We need to get out of here," he whispered urgently. "Now." Maria looked at him, startled. "But the bus." "There's no time," Carlos interrupted, picking Sophia up. "Let's go through the back exit." They moved quickly, trying not to attract attention. The back exit opened onto an empty parking lot, lit by dim streetlights. Carlos ran, keeping Sophia close to him, Maria trying to keep up. They reached the fence separating the bus station from the street, and Carlos, with an effort, managed to climb over it, helping Maria and Sophia do the same. On the other side, the street was deserted. They ran to an abandoned taxi stand, hiding behind a low wall. Carlos was breathing heavily, sweat running down his face despite the cold. He looked back, expecting to see the black car, the men chasing them. But for now, nothing. "We can't stay here," Maria said breathlessly. "They'll find us." Carlos knew she was right. But where to go? They had no money, no one. They were alone, in a city they didn't know, being hunted by men who knew no mercy. It was then that Sophia, still in his arms, pointed to something on the floor. It was a cell phone, lying there, as if someone had lost it. Carlos picked it up, looking at the screen. There was no password. He clicked on the call icon, his heart pounding. "What are you going to do?" Maria asked, frightened. Carlos didn't answer. He dialed the only number that came to mind. The number of his young fiancée. The girl who had changed his life in one night. The girl they were being pursued by. The phone rang once, twice. He was about to give up when he heard a voice on the other end. "Hello." It was her. Her voice was weak, shaken, but it was her. "It's me," Carlos said softly. "The guy from the ride." Silence. Then a shaky sigh. "You shouldn't have called." "I had no choice," he replied, his voice breaking. "They're after me. My daughter. My mother. We have nowhere to go." Another silence. This time longer. Carlos could hear her breathing, as if she were fighting something. "Where are you?" she asked finally. He looked around, searching for any landmarks. "Near the bus station. We were trying to catch a bus, but—" "Don't go," she cut in, her voice urgent. "Stay there. I'll come to you." "But what about them?" Carlos asked, fear tightening his throat. "They'll find you. They'll find us." "Trust me," she said, and for the first time, there was a firmness in her voice that hadn't been there before. "Just stay there. Don't move." The call was cut off. Carlos stood still, the cell phone in his hand, not knowing what to do. Maria looked at him, her eyes full of doubt. "Do you trust her?" she asked. He didn't know. He wasn't sure of anything. But at that moment, he had no choice. "We have nowhere to go," he admitted, looking at Sophia. "If she can help." He didn't finish his sentence. He didn't need to. All the options were bad. But perhaps this was the least bad. They leaned against the wall, waiting. Carlos held Sophia in his arms, Maria at his side, the three of them united by fear and hope. Every minute felt like an eternity. Every sound, a threat. Until finally, they saw a figure approaching. A woman, alone, wearing a coat too big for her, the hood covering her face. She walked quickly, looking around, as if she, too, feared being followed. When he got closer, he lowered his hood. It was her, the young bride. Her face was marred with bruises, her lips were cut, and her eyes were swollen. But she was alive. And for the first time that night, Carlos felt a glimmer of hope. "I don't have much time," she said without preamble. "They're after me. And now, they're after you too." "What?" Carlos asked, his voice hoarse. "What does this have to do with us?" She looked at Sophia, then at Maria, and finally at Carlos. There was a pain in her eyes that he couldn't understand. "Because," she replied softly, "I'm his daughter, and he doesn't let anyone get away." The revelation fell like a bucket of cold water on Carlos. He took a step back, still holding Sophia in his arms, while the young woman, the tycoon's daughter, looked at him with a mixture of shame and despair. Maria held her son's arm, as if afraid he would collapse right there. The night seemed even darker, the air heavier, as if the whole world had conspired to plunge them into this nightmare. "You're his daughter?" Carlos repeated in disbelief. The man who's chasing us. She nodded, her eyes downcast, her hands trembling. My father isn't just a rich man, she explained, her voice breaking. He's powerful. He's everywhere. Police, politicians, judges. There's no escaping him. Carlos felt a lump form in his throat. Everything made sense now. The men, the guns, the relentless pursuit. It wasn't just about a runaway bride. It was about an heiress. About money. About control. And why did you run away? Maria asked, her voice trembling but firm. If he's so powerful, why risk everything? The young woman looked at her hands, as if searching for words that wouldn't come. Because I couldn't take it anymore, she finally replied. He sold me. Literally. He arranged a marriage with a man 3 times my age, just to seal a deal. I wasn't a daughter. I was a bargaining chip. Carlos felt a wave of nausea. He looked at Sophia, who was listening silently, her eyes wide. He didn't want her to hear this. He didn't want her to know how cruel the world could be. What now? He asked, his voice hoarse. What do we do? She looked up, and for the first time, Carlos saw determination in them. We disappear, she said. Together. Maria shook her head in disbelief. How? They'll find us. You said yourself there's no escaping him. There is a way, the young woman replied, pulling a card from her coat pocket. My father has a safe at home. It's not just money. It has documents. Evidence of everything he's done. Corruption, money laundering, even murder. If we can get it, we'll have power over him. Carlos looked at the card, then at her. And how do we get to this safe? I know the code, she said. And I know when the security is weakest. But we need to go now, before he changes everything. Carlos felt the weight of the decision fall on his shoulders. It was madness. A desperate plan, full of risks. But looking at Sophia, at Maria, at the young woman before him, he knew he had no choice. What if we get caught? He asked, his voice low. She looked into his eyes, unblinking. We can't be. Silence. The wind blew softly, carrying the scent of rain and fear. Carlos took a deep breath, holding Sophia close. Okay, he said finally. We'll go. They moved through the streets like shadows, keeping to the alleys, the dimly lit areas where the cameras couldn't reach. The young woman guided them, knowing every corner, every shortcut, as if she'd planned this for years. Carlos carried Sophia in his arms, Maria at his side, the 3 of them following the woman who, until a few hours ago, had been a stranger. They arrived in an upscale neighborhood, where the houses were mansions surrounded by high walls and security cameras. The young woman pointed to one of them, imposing, with lights on in some rooms. It's over there, she said, her voice shaking. Security changes shifts in 20 minutes. This is our chance. Carlos looked at the wall, at the cameras, at the patrolling guards. How do people get in? She took a card from her pocket, an employee access card. I stole this from my dad driver. He won't realize it until tomorrow. Carlos no question, there was no time. They approached the service gate, and the young woman swiped her card. A beep. The door opened. They entered, their hearts pounding. The garden was immense, full of shadows. The young woman led them to a side door, which she opened with another code. Inside, the house was even more impressive and frightening. Marble floors, expensive paintings, the smell of money and power. The safe is in the office, she whispered. 2nd floor. They climbed the stairs in silence, each step echoing like a gunshot. Carlos could feel the sweat running down his back, his breathing quickening. Sophia clutched his hand tightly, as if she knew if she let go, everything would collapse. They arrived at the office. The young woman entered another code on the door, which opened with a click. Inside, the darkness was almost total, broken only by the dim light of a lamp. The safe was hidden behind a painting. She unlocked it with the last digits, and the heavy door swung open. Inside, there wasn't just money. There were folders, documents, photos, evidence. That's it, she said, taking everything. With this, we have power. Carlos was about to breathe a sigh of relief when he heard noise. Footsteps. Voices. Someone is coming, Maria whispered, terrified. The young woman hurriedly closed the safe, but it was too late. The office door opened. One of the guards entered, gun drawn. There you are, he said, smiling. The boss knew you were coming. Carlos stood in front of Sophia and Maria, ready to fight, even though he knew there was no way out. The young woman looked at him, her eyes filled with guilt. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The guard raised his gun. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. Until suddenly, the lights went out. A scream. A gunshot. The darkness was total. The shot echoed like thunder inside the office, followed by screams, hurried footsteps, and the sound of bodies falling. Carlos instinctively threw Sophia to the floor, covering her with his own body, while Maria cowered beside them. The smell of gunpowder filled the air, mixed with the fear that exuded from each of them. For a moment, only the heavy breathing and the distant sound of alarms going off could be heard. Suddenly, a dim light flooded the room. A cell phone screen lit up on the floor. Carlos reached out and picked up the device, illuminating the face of the guard, who lay unconscious on the floor, a trickle of blood running from his temple. Beside him, another man, dressed in a security uniform, lay motionless, his gun still in his hand. But that wasn't what caught Carlos's attention. It was the figure that emerged from the shadows, holding a bloodied iron bar. It was her, the young woman. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, but there was a cold determination in her gaze that Carlos had never seen before. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice shaky but firm. "The other guards should be on their way." Carlos stood up, pulling Sophia and Maria with him. The young woman threw the iron bar to the floor and grabbed the documents from the safe, stuffing them into a backpack. "Why did you do that?" Carlos asked, looking at the fallen guard. She didn't answer immediately. She just adjusted her backpack and looked at the door. "Because I couldn't let them hurt you," she said finally. "Not after everything you've done for me." Carlos felt a lump in his throat. There was no time for words. They ran out of the office, taking the stairs two at a time. The alarms blared louder, and they could hear voices shouting orders, footsteps approaching. The young woman led them through side hallways, through service doors, until they reached the kitchen. There, an open door led to the back garden. "We'll leave this way," she whispered. They ran across the wet lawn, their feet sinking into the dirt, their hearts pounding so hard Carlos was sure it would explode. They reached the back wall, and the young woman pulled out a pair of pruning shears that were leaning against a tree. With effort, she cut through the fence, opening a narrow passage. "Come on," she said, pushing Sophia to the other side. Carlos helped Maria through, then squeezed through the opening, feeling the screen scratch his arms. On the other side, the street was deserted, lit only by dim streetlights. They ran to an old car parked a few blocks away, the same car Carlos had driven that fateful night. "The keys are in the sun visor," the young woman said, pointing. Carlos opened the door, started the engine with trembling hands, and they sped off, tires screeching on the asphalt. No one spoke for the first few minutes. Only the sound of heavy breathing and the roar of the engine shattered the silence. It was Sophia who broke the ice. "Are we safe now?" she asked, her voice small and scared. Carlos looked at her in the rearview mirror. He didn't know how to respond. He didn't know if they were safe. He didn't know if they ever would be. The young woman, sitting in the front seat, turned to them. Her face was lined with exhaustion, but there was something new in her eyes, something that looked like hope. "For now," she replied, looking at the documents in her backpack. "But we have this, and that changes everything." Carlos nodded, but he didn't feel relieved. He looked at Maria, who was hugging Sophia, her eyes closed, as if in prayer. He didn't know what lay ahead. He didn't know if those papers would be enough to protect them all. But he knew one thing. He wouldn't give up, not while Sophia needed him. They drove for hours, aimlessly, just try to put as much distance between themselves and the city as possible. The sun began to rise, painting the sky pink and orange, as if the outside world didn't know, or care, about the hell they'd lived through that night. Finally, they stopped at an abandoned gas station on the side of a deserted road. Carlos turned off the engine and turned to the young woman. "What now?" he asked, his voice hoarse. She opened her backpack and took out the documents, leafing through them carefully. "Now we use this," she said. "These tests, they can bring down my father. They can give us a new life." Carlos looked at the papers, then at her. "Are you willing to do this?" he asked. "Report your own father." She looked at him, her eyes filled with a pain that went beyond that night. "He stopped being my father a long time ago," she replied. "He's a monster. and monsters need to be stopped. Silence. The wind blew softly, carrying the smell of earth and gasoline. Carlos looked at Sophia, who slept exhausted in the back seat. Then at Maria, who watched him with a mixture of fear and pride. "Then we do this," he said finally. "Together." The young woman nodded, and for the first time, Carlos saw a genuine smile on her face. It wasn't a smile of happiness. It was a smile of relief. That, finally, she wasn't alone. They stood there for a while, planning their next steps, as the sun rose on the horizon, promising a new day. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be quick. But for the first time in a long time, Carlos felt there was a chance. A chance for justice. A chance for peace. If you've made it this far, you know this story isn't just about persecution and fear. It's about courage, about family, about ordinary people facing the impossible to protect those they love. If this video moved you and left you heartbroken, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss a thing. And if you think the story ended here, get ready. See you soon.